Hello everyone, and thanks for taking the time to check out this video. For today's brief presentation, we're going to be talking about the Dead Air Wolverine, and more specifically, what I've learned about how that suppressor performs on 5.56 AR pattern firearms, particularly those of the 10.3 inch variety. Quick disclaimer for any of my regular viewers, this is going to be a super niche video, which I know is going to have a very small audience. Sometimes I do that on this channel. In this particular case, I was trying to do my own research on the subject, and I found there really wasn't much information on YouTube, so I figured I would try to do my part in filling that void by trying to make the video, which I was trying to find. I do have plenty of content in the pipeline aimed at a broader audience, SKS content, MP5 content, and IDF carbine content all coming soon. But for today, I'm really just talking to like a dozen people who, like me, just need information on using an unusual suppressor in a role it really wasn't designed for. If you happen to be one of those people, let's get into it. I got the Dead Air PBS-1 Wolverine for the same reason most people got it, to suppress AKs. And that was novel fun for a while, but honestly, I never arrived at a suppressed AK setup that I really liked. Long story short, I only own full-size AKs, most of which are based on RPK receivers and trunnions, and by the time I had them set up to do everything that I wanted them to do, I found them to be unreasonably heavy. In fairness to the Dead Air Wolverine, the suppressor worked exactly as it was supposed to. It was really just a planning failure on my part. I will say that I did try the Wolverine on a friend's Romanian Draco, and that was actually a pretty compelling setup. Not quite so compelling that I went out and bought a Draco for myself, but for a minute there I was pretty tempted. In any case, my largely unsatisfying ventures into AK suppression left me with a suppressor that I didn't really have a great use for, and I'm guessing I'm not the first Wolverine owner to find themselves in that situation. So I turned my attention to other platforms, particularly the AR. My first experiment was to set up the Wolverine with a hub and chemo adapter so I could use it on my 14.5 ARs, which already have chemo mounts. That worked all right. In fact, I enjoyed the Wolverine more on those rifles than I did on most of the AK setups I used. However, weight was still an issue. The Dead Air Wolverine with chemo adapter weighs about 24.5 ounces, not including the weight of the muzzle device, and adds more than 7.5 inches to the length of the firearm. Just as a point of reference, that's almost 10 ounces of weight and an inch of length, more than this YHM Turbo T3 using the exact same mount. That's not just inefficient, it's straddling the line of unreasonably inefficient. Additionally, while the gassing was pretty tame on my 14.5 with mid-length gas, I was getting pretty intense blowback on my 14.5 with carbine length gas. You might be able to see in this clip, I am trying to clear my airway after a very short string of fire. So once again, an okay application, but not something that made me glad I owned a Wolverine. I was still acutely aware that I was using the wrong tool for the job and would have been better served with another T3 or a similar dedicated 5.56 suppressor. So my search continued. It wasn't long before I started thinking about one of the few decent Wolverine videos I'd seen on YouTube, which is from Tyler at Silencer Shop, and I'll play a clip of that for you now.
5.56, it's fantastic on that with a really short barrel. If you're, Mark 18 guy or something like that, there's a whole bunch of back pressure in that system. This will take a lot of that out of it.
Should have been a reaction YouTuber. In any case, personally, I would have liked to see a little footage of that, but Tyler has always struck me as a straight shooter, so I figured it was at least worth testing for myself. For my setup, I chose a 10.3 inch Centurion barrel, which utilizes a carbine length gas system and what is essentially a crane spec gas port at 0.069 inches. On paper, I think a 10.3 inch barrel makes the most sense for a Wolverine, even compared to the ballistically superior 11.5. For starters, 10.3 is really the shortest you can go on a DI/internal piston 5.56, and due to the excess length and mass of the Wolverine, a shorter barrel allows you to keep that center of mass closer to your body and reduce the overall length of the weapon. For that reason, it is particularly appropriate for absorbing the especially energetic muzzle blast of a 10.3, which can actually cause real damage over time in lighter duty cans. And really quickly, guys, let's be crystal clear that I'm not trying to construct an argument that the Dead Air Wolverine is secretly an ideal 5.56 suppressor. It isn't. I'm just saying that if you're going to put it on an AR-15 in 5.56, putting it on a 10.3 is probably one of the best ways, at least on paper, to mitigate its drawbacks while simultaneously taking advantage of its strengths. As for the crane spec carbine length gas system, this seemed like a good choice because it should allow me to dial things in nicely with a dedicated suppressor, yet it shouldn't preclude the barrel from being used in an unsuppressed roll down the road if this particular build doesn't work out. Finally, this time I did choose to attach the suppressor using direct threading rather than a QD system, and obviously this is just to keep the weight as low as possible. This definitely would have helped a bit on the 14.5s as well. However, that was not an option in those cases because those have pin and welded muzzle devices for legal reasons. Additionally, I should note that because the Dead Air Wolverine indexes off the muzzle, you are left with quite a bit of exposed threads. In my opinion, this is a textbook use case for jam washer, and that's going to do a few things for you. It's going to clean up the aesthetics, it's going to protect the threads, and it's also going to give you an additional level of security for that suppressor. I should also mention, I'm going off script here, I did have an idea that I think is pretty interesting. It's not so interesting to me that I'm going to do it myself, but I can't imagine that some people out there who are more mechanically inclined or just like fun tinkering projects might want to give it a go. And if you do, I would love to see what you come up with. It occurred to me that if you use a wider diameter jam nut, and I'll try to throw up a sketch somewhere of what I'm thinking about, and you either welded or threaded a pin into that jam nut, you could allow the Dead Air Wolverine's AK style locking collar to be used on an AR-15. The way that locking collar works, you don't need the pin to be spring loaded the way it is on an AK front sight assembly. So if you were to rock set a jam nut in place, clocked right where you want it, you would still be able to use the locking collar on the Dead Air Wolverine just like it was an AK, and that would allow you to not have to put quite so much torque on it and still keep it secure. I know that wasn't my most articulate explanation. Hopefully through editing and maybe a diagram, I was able to communicate what I'm talking about. Like I said, totally not something you need to do. You can accomplish everything with torque, but if you're trying to come up with a really clever AK-AR hybrid muzzle attachment, I do think there's some cool options there. In any case, I obviously did put together a 10.3 AR pistol in order to test the Wolverine, and long story short, Tyler was right. This is an awesome setup and by far the best use I have found so far for my Dead Air Wolverine. In other words, I really like how this weapon performs, and I'm not convinced that a different suppressor would make it that much better, and that's really what I was going for here. First of all, aside from the Draco, I guess, it's the first truly maneuverable Wolverine setup I've handled so far. It is a little front heavy, but the overall weight is low enough that that imperfect balance isn't a big deal. Just as a point of reference, this direct threaded Wolverine only adds 2 ounces and 1 inch compared to a Surefire RC2 with muzzle device. So if you know what a Mark 18 or CQBR is supposed to feel like, this isn't going to feel a whole lot different. Sure, you lose QD capability, but honestly, that's no loss for me. I have literally no use case for an unsuppressed 10.3. In terms of gassing, that's really where the Wolverine shined. Just like Tyler claimed, the low back pressure design of the suppressor absolutely does lend itself to a CQBR or Mark 18 type system. Based on my prior experience with similar setups, I started testing conservatively with a Springco blue buffer spring, an H3 buffer, and a PRI gas busting charging handle, and I quickly realized that this was way overkill. By the end of my testing, I was using an H2 buffer and mil-spec buffer spring, and I relocated that PRI charging handle to a different weapon which needed it a lot more, because gas blowback in this particular system is really a non-issue. When I'm dialing in an AR-15's gas system, I always test fire 2 particular rounds, this Indian M193, which despite its name is actually the weakest loaded 5.56 or 223 ammunition I've ever come across, as well as this batch of Aguila M855, which is loaded so hot it's borderline dangerous. By seeing how the weapon performs with these 2 rather extreme data points, I feel pretty confident in getting a weapon set up so that it can safely and reliably run a wide variety of ammunition types. Before I drop down the buffer weight, I actually got some short strokes using the Indian 193, which if nothing else should give you an idea of just how tame the back pressure in this system really is. As another data point, my magazines and lower receiver stayed relatively clean and gunk-free over a couple hundred rounds, and I am not used to that in a suppressed AR. I'm more used to things getting absolutely filthy after half a magazine. In terms of decibel reduction, I'm not set up to give you any objective data in that regard, but I can say that I was subjectively quite satisfied with the performance. A 10.3 5.56 is not going to be hearing safe no matter what suppressor you use, so I was obviously using hearing protection while firing. All I can really say is that it sounded to me exactly the way I would expect a suppressed shorty to sound, which is orders of magnitude quieter than it would have been without the suppressor. Additionally, well, common sense would seem to indicate that an overboard 30 cal can, like the Dead Air Wolverine, would be noticeably louder than a dedicated 5.56 can. There's some pretty hard data out there, such as the Thunder Beast Arms 2023 Silencer Summit sound test, which actually indicates that the opposite is true and suggests that on a barrel this short, expansion volume is actually more important to decibel reduction than bore diameter. Whether or not that's actually true is a bit beyond my pay grade and area of expertise, but I think the real takeaway for the purpose of this video is whether the decibels go 1 or 2 in either direction, the Dead Air Wolverine is going to have functionally the same effect as a dedicated 5.56 can. It's going to do a great job of taming the insane flash, concussion, and noise of a short-barreled 5.56. If you're using hearing protection the way you absolutely should be, it is not going to be harmful or disorienting to fire this weapon in any environment, including confined spaces. If for some reason you are forced to fire the weapon without hearing protection, it very well may cause temporary or permanent hearing damage. However, that damage will be greatly diminished compared to what you would have experienced without the suppressor. In other words, I really don't see the Wolverine putting you at risk of any negative outcomes that you could have avoided by using a dedicated 5.56 can. That just doesn't seem realistic to me in the least. So in summary, I think I finally found a use for the Dead Air Wolverine that I am truly content with. Although the suppressor is excessively long and heavy, direct threading it to a 10.3-inch AR-15 really helps mitigate those dimensional handicaps. Additionally, the inherent strength of the suppressor, combined with its low back pressure design and a relatively high expansion volume, all lend themselves well to this specific application and create surprisingly competitive performance even compared to dedicated 5.56 suppressors. So does that mean you should go out and buy a Dead Air Wolverine for the purpose of using it on a Mark 18 style build? Probably not. Just because this works well doesn't mean that other things don't work better. An 11.5 or 12.5 inch 5.56 with a modern flow-through suppressor will be just about the same size and weight, and yet fundamentally more capable in every way worth measuring. The Mark 18 concept is a proven weapon with a terrifying resume. However, its retirement is absolutely warranted. There are totally better options in 2024. That said, if you already have a Dead Air Wolverine and you don't feel like you're getting your money's worth out of it, I do think this is absolutely an application you should consider. I, for one, am very excited to know that I'm getting the most out of my tax stamp, and I have a feeling this setup will be a range staple of mine for many years to come. And that's the video, guys. As always, I hope you found it to be helpful, entertaining, or at the very least worth the time you spent watching it. And if you did find the video useful, please consider doing any combination of the YouTube algorithm stuff, hitting like, hitting comment, or hitting subscribe. Not only does it really help me, and it does really help me, but it's also a very effective tool we all can use to keep firearm content on YouTube, because all YouTube really cares about is engagement, and if they know that firearm content is what's keeping viewers engaged, they're going to make sure that firearm content stays on the platform. Other than that, thanks again for taking the time to check out this video, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.